On a stormy morning in the woods, Tom Hanks, a wildlife photographer in his late 50s, was taking his usual walk near his cabin. He had lived alone since his wife passed, finding peace in the quiet of the forest. But today was different. The heavy rain had turned the peaceful creek behind his cabin into a raging torrent. As he walked, the sound of rushing water filled the air, but then something else caught his attention, a desperate, high-pitched cry coming from the creek. Tom's heart raced as he rushed to the edge. Through the churning water, he saw it, a small pup, fighting the current, struggling to stay afloat. Without thinking, Tom stripped off his jacket and plunged into the icy water. The pup was in danger, and Tom knew he had to act fast. It was a moment that would change both their lives forever. Tom's heart pounded as he plunged into the icy creek. The current was stronger than he'd anticipated, and it tried to pull him under, but he kept his focus on the pup. The small creature was barely hanging on, its tiny body being swept along the raging water. Tom reached out, his hands trembling, and grabbed the pup just as it disappeared beneath the surface for a second time. He pulled it toward him with all his strength, gasping for breath as the cold water weighed him down. Finally, Tom managed to scramble to the bank, both he and the pup soaking wet, trembling from the cold. The pup lay motionless in his arms, its small body limp and heavy. Tom's mind raced. The pup had been under the water for too long. Was it already too late? He checked for breathing. Nothing. His heart sank. But then, on a faint instinct, he positioned the pup's head downward, hoping to help drain the water from its lungs. He gently pressed on its chest, hoping for a sign. Then, as if in response to his touch, the pup suddenly convulsed and coughed up water. Tom froze. The pup's eyes fluttered open, revealing a bright, terrified look, but the breathing was shallow and labored. Relief washed over Tom, though he knew the pup was still far from out of danger. "Come on, little one," Tom whispered, his voice soft but firm, rubbing the pup's chest gently. He didn't expect the pup to respond, but to his amazement, it let out a soft whimper and seemed to relax a little. The miracle wasn't just that the pup had survived. It was that the pup was still alive, and, more surprisingly, it seemed to be showing trust in Tom. Tom gently cradled the pup in his arms, feeling its heart race, but there was something else. The warmth of the pup against his chest, the way it instinctively nuzzled closer for warmth, made Tom realize how fragile life truly was. It wasn't just a wild animal he had rescued, it was a life, a small soul that had been struggling to survive, and now it was looking to him for care and protection. As he carefully carried the pup back to the cabin, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in him. He had saved animals before, but there was something about this moment that felt different. He had saved this pup from death, but the bond forming between them felt like something deeper, something that defied the usual wild animal instincts. Tom settled the pup down by the stone fireplace and set to work quickly. He gathered towels and blankets, drying the pup as gently as he could. The rain continued to pour outside, but inside, Tom focused entirely on the pup in front of him. He thought of all the times he had been alone since his wife passed, the quiet nights by the fire, the endless days of solitude. But as he looked down at the pup, still shivering but now breathing more evenly, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time in years, Tom felt the presence of another living being who needed him, who was relying on him. It was as if fate had brought them together in that very moment, not just for Tom to save the pup, but for the pup to save him in return. They were both survivors, and their paths had crossed in the most unlikely of ways. Tom knew that the bond forming between them was something he hadn't expected, but it was real, and it would change his life forever. As Tom carefully cradled the pup in his arms, he couldn't help but think of the storm outside. The rain pounded against the cabin's windows, and the wind howled through the trees, but it was the quiet within that seemed to fill Tom's heart. He thought of his wife, Sarah. It had been years since she passed, and the loneliness still crept into his bones. Their dream had been to retire in this cabin, to live out their days surrounded by nature. But cancer had taken her too soon, and now, he was here alone, just as he had been since that fateful day. As he walked back to the cabin, Tom looked down at the small, shivering pup. There was something about this little creature, struggling to survive, that pulled at his heart in a way he hadn't expected. The pup was so fragile, so small, and yet so strong in its own way. As much as he had tried to bury his grief and focus on his work as a photographer and writer, there was an emptiness that lingered inside him. This pup, this tiny life, had unexpectedly filled part of that emptiness. It was as if fate had brought them together in this moment of tragedy, a storm outside and a storm inside him. The pup was his new companion, a tiny symbol of hope after all these years. When Tom finally reached the front door, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. The warmth of the cabin was a stark contrast to the cold storm outside. He set the pup down on the rug by the stone fireplace, his muscles sore from carrying the animal all the way back. The pup, though still weak, seemed to understand the safety of the space, and it lay there quietly, its breathing more even now. Tom wasted no time. He fetched towels from the closet and gently dried the pup, working carefully so as not to cause any discomfort. He could see the little creature's ribs, its body still trembling from the cold, and the gash on its leg that had begun to crust over. As he dried it off, Tom noticed the soft fur, matted and dirty from the creek. There was still so much that needed to be done, but for now, all he could do was take it one step at a time. Sitting by the fire, Tom carefully examined the pup's leg, cleaning the wound as best as he could. The pup barely flinched, and Tom wondered if it was exhaustion, or if it was simply trusting him. He had no idea how this little creature had found its way to the creek, but he was determined to do everything he could to help it heal. He made sure to feed it small portions of food, tuna, a favorite from his own emergency supplies, hoping it would regain its strength. After the pup had eaten, Tom looked down at it and smiled. "You need a name," he murmured. He paused, thinking of the storm that had brought them together, the one that had raged through the night and led him to save this pup. "How about Storm?" he said quietly, almost to himself. The pup didn't react, but it looked up at him with those golden eyes, and Tom felt an undeniable connection. This was no longer just a wild animal in need of rescue, it was a part of his life now, and he had a responsibility to see it through. As the fire crackled in the background, Tom sat back, feeling an odd sense of peace. The storm outside was still raging, but inside, the bond between him and Storm had begun to take root. Whatever had brought them together, Tom knew that they would both need each other in the days to come. Over the next few days, Tom noticed small changes in Storm. At first, the pup had been weak and wary, but now, with each passing day, it grew stronger. The injury on its leg was healing, and its coat was beginning to shine again, no longer matted and soaked. But what surprised Tom the most was the way Storm was slowly starting to trust him. Despite being a wild animal, Storm showed no signs of aggression. It had every reason to fear humans, but instead, it seemed to be drawn to Tom. Every time Tom walked around the cabin, Storm would follow, staying close but never too far. The pup had quickly become comfortable in the warmth of the fire and the safety of Tom's home. It was like it knew it had found someone it could trust, someone who would take care of it. At first, Tom didn't think much of it. He was just glad that Storm was healing and becoming more active. But then, one afternoon, as Tom sat down on the couch to read a book, something happened that made his heart skip a beat. Storm, who had been lounging near the fireplace, suddenly padded over to him. Without any warning, the pup jumped up onto the couch and curled up in his lap. Tom froze, unsure of what to do. He had never expected Storm, a wild animal, to seek him out in such a way. The pup settled in, its small body warm against his legs. It wasn't long before Storm let out a contented sigh and began to purr softly, a sound so similar to a house cat but much deeper and more primal. Tom couldn't help but smile, but at the same time, he felt a deep sense of responsibility settle over him. This was no ordinary animal. Storm was not just a pup he had saved from drowning. There was something about the bond forming between them that felt different, special. As the days passed, their routine became more familiar. Tom would go about his usual activities, like tending to the fire or writing at his desk, and Storm would be right there with him, watching quietly. Sometimes, the pup would rest at his feet, other times, it would sit by the window, looking out at the world beyond. It was clear that Storm wasn't just recovering physically, the pup seemed to be forming an emotional bond with Tom that neither of them had expected. The bond grew stronger as Storm started to seek out Tom even more. During quiet evenings, Storm would nudge Tom's hand with its head, asking for attention, and Tom would oblige, running his fingers through the soft fur. There was something comforting about the simple act of companionship, something that Tom hadn't realized he had been missing. One evening, as Tom sat by the fire, Storm climbed up into his lap again, curling up against him. For the first time in a long while, Tom felt the weight of his emotional loneliness lift, even if just a little. Storm had become more than just a wild animal in need of rescue, he was now a companion, a friend, and a reminder that connections could form in the most unexpected ways. Tom had spent years alone in the cabin, but now, with Storm by his side, he didn't feel quite so alone anymore. The pup had given him something to care for, something to love, and in return, Tom had given Storm a second chance at life. It was a bond that neither of them had anticipated, but it was growing stronger with every passing day. And for the first time since Sarah's passing, Tom felt the weight of his grief start to lift, replaced by something new, hope. It was a cold January morning when everything changed. Tom and Storm were out for their usual walk by the creek, enjoying the quiet of the snow-covered woods. The air was crisp, and the creek, which had once been a rushing torrent, was now frozen over. The ice was thick enough to walk on, but Tom always made sure to stay close to the bank, where the ice was more stable. Storm, as usual, was close by, watching the world around him with those sharp, golden eyes. But then, a sudden scream broke the silence. Tom's heart stopped. He turned quickly, scanning the creek, and spotted a young girl, maybe around 10 years old, struggling in the water. Her pink winter coat was already soaked, and the ice beneath her feet had cracked, sending her tumbling into the freezing creek. She was flailing, trying to keep her head above the surface, but the current was too strong, and the water was rising fast. Her screams for help echoed in the cold air. Without thinking, Tom started running toward her, but the deep snow slowed him down. He shouted for her to hold on, but he knew the distance between them was too great, and the ice was treacherous. His heart pounded in his chest as he pushed through the snow, praying he'd make it in time. But then, something Tom hadn't expected happened. Storm, who had been walking just behind him, suddenly darted ahead. Tom watched in shock as the pup leaped forward with surprising speed and agility, heading straight for the ice where the girl was struggling. In that moment, Tom realized that Storm wasn't just following him, he was doing something on his own. Storm's paws moved quickly across the ice, his movements graceful and calculated. He seemed to understand the danger, carefully distributing his weight so the ice wouldn't crack beneath him. It was as if he knew exactly what to do. Tom's heart raced as he saw the pup reach the girl, his instincts guiding him. The girl, terrified and shivering, reached out for Storm, her hands desperately grabbing for the harness he was wearing. Storm didn't hesitate. He slowly backed up, pulling the girl toward the solid ice, inch by inch, with incredible strength and precision. Tom reached them just as the pup helped drag the girl to safety. He quickly moved in, pulling her the rest of the way onto the bank and out of the water. The girl was gasping for air, her face pale and trembling, but she was alive. Storm stood by, watching as Tom wrapped the girl in his jacket, keeping her warm and safe. The pup didn't leave their side. Tom stood there, staring at Storm, unable to fully comprehend what he had just witnessed. The little wild animal that he had rescued from the creek was now saving a human life. As he held the girl, keeping her close to the fire, Tom felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a bond between a man and a pup, it was something much deeper. Storm wasn't just a companion. He had a purpose, a role to play that Tom hadn't fully understood until now. Tom realized that the connection between him and Storm wasn't just a random twist of fate. The pup had been brought into his life for a reason, and that reason went beyond their shared moments of companionship. Storm's instincts had guided him to save the girl, and Tom couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of something even greater. Storm wasn't just his friend, he was something more, a bridge between the wild and the human world. Tom now knew that their bond had a purpose far beyond what he had ever imagined. The news of Storm's heroic rescue quickly spread through the small town and beyond. The story of a bobcat saving a young girl from drowning made headlines, and soon, the local news stations were covering the incredible tale. People were amazed at the pup's courage, but what really caught their attention was how calm and gentle Storm had been with Tom and the girl. Wildlife experts from nearby towns began arriving at Tom's cabin to see the pup for themselves. They were fascinated by Storm's behavior, which seemed completely out of the ordinary for a wild animal. Most wild bobcats were cautious and aloof, not trusting humans. But Storm had shown an unusual level of trust and even affection toward Tom. He was well on his way to becoming a sensation in the world of wildlife conservation, and experts couldn't get enough of him. Among the experts who visited was Dr. Jessica Chin, a renowned wildlife behaviorist who had spent years studying the rehabilitation of wild animals. She had heard about Storm's rescue and wanted to see firsthand if the pup's behavior could be replicated in other wild animals. After observing Storm's interaction with Tom and hearing about his progress, Dr. Chin sat down with Tom. She spoke about her research on the emotional intelligence of wild animals and how some creatures had a surprising capacity for forming bonds with humans. "What you have here with Storm is extraordinary," Dr. Chin explained. "His behavior challenges everything we know about wild bobcats. This pup has the potential to help teach people about wildlife conservation and the importance of preserving natural habitats." Dr. Chin went on to suggest that Storm could be an ambassador for wildlife education, helping to raise awareness about bobcats and other wild animals. She proposed that Storm could be part of her program, helping to educate children and adults alike about the wild world and the need for its protection. Storm could become a symbol of the connection between humans and wildlife, Dr. Chin said. "He's got the charisma and the heart for it." Tom listened carefully to Dr. Chin's words. The idea of Storm becoming a part of a larger mission to protect wildlife was tempting. He could see how Storm's unique story could inspire others, and it felt like a way to give back to the world that had already given him so much. But as much as the idea appealed to him, a part of Tom was hesitant. Tom knew that Storm was a wild animal, and deep down, he understood that the pup belonged in the wild, not living in a cabin or participating in education programs. Tom had always respected nature and its boundaries, and he struggled with the idea of keeping Storm from his natural habitat. He had already grown so attached to the pup, and the bond between them had become something he wasn't ready to let go of. But Tom also knew that Storm was a wild animal, and keeping him in a human environment might not be fair to the pup in the long run. Tom's heart was torn between the love he felt for Storm and the reality of what was best for the pup. He couldn't help but wonder if letting Storm go would be the right thing to do, even though it would mean saying goodbye to the companion he had come to rely on. The dilemma was a heavy one. Tom had saved Storm's life, but now, he wasn't sure what the future would hold for either of them. After days of careful thought, Tom finally made the hardest decision of his life. He had been torn between his love for Storm and the reality that the pup was a wild animal, deserving of freedom. But after much reflection, Tom realized that Storm had already changed both of their lives. The bond they shared was undeniable, and he didn't want to let go of the connection they had formed. With Dr. Chin's help, Tom agreed to let Storm stay with him, but with a new purpose. They would work together to help educate others about wildlife conservation. Storm's story, and his unexpected behavior, could inspire people to appreciate the wild and understand the importance of preserving natural habitats. Tom saw how powerful Storm's presence could be in spreading that message, and it was a way for them to do something meaningful together. It wasn't an easy decision for Tom, and there were still moments when he wondered if he had made the right choice. Deep down, he knew Storm was meant to be free, but he also understood that the world needed to hear his story. They could help change the way people thought about wildlife, showing them that animals like Storm were not just creatures to be feared or admired from a distance, they were living beings with intelligence, emotions, and the ability to form deep connections with humans. Tom and Storm became advocates for wildlife conservation. They traveled to schools and nature centers, sharing their story and educating people about the importance of protecting wild animals and their environments. Storm's calm, intelligent demeanor made him an ideal ambassador. He helped people see the wild in a new light, one that emphasized respect and understanding rather than fear or distance. As the years passed, Tom found himself more fulfilled than he had ever been. The emptiness he had felt after Sarah's passing began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose he had not expected. In the quiet moments of his life, when he sat by the fire with Storm curled up beside him, Tom realized that his rescue of Storm had saved him in more ways than one. The pup had filled a gap in his heart that he hadn't even known existed. Storm had brought joy, companionship, and a renewed sense of connection to the world around him. There were still hard days, of course. Days when Tom missed Sarah terribly, or when he doubted whether he had made the right choice in keeping Storm with him. But on those days, when Storm would nuzzle up to him or purr softly, Tom knew he had done the right thing. Storm wasn't just a wild animal he had saved. Storm had become his family, his companion, and his reminder that sometimes the most unexpected connections could lead to the most profound changes. Together, Tom and Storm had built a legacy, one that went beyond wildlife conservation. They had shown the world that love, trust, and understanding could bridge the gap between humans and animals, creating a bond that transcended all boundaries. And for Tom, that was a legacy worth sharing with the world. As the years passed, Tom and Storm's bond only grew stronger. They traveled together, sharing their story with schools, nature centers, and wildlife enthusiasts. Tom's life had taken a turn he never expected. What started as a rescue mission had turned into something much deeper, a partnership that helped educate and inspire countless people to respect and protect the wild. Storm became a symbol of the unexpected connections that could form between humans and animals, showing the world that even the wildest creatures had the capacity for love and trust. Tom saw how much Storm had impacted people's lives. The pup's calm nature and willingness to trust humans in such a unique way made others realize that animals were not just subjects to observe from a distance, but beings with feelings and instincts that could connect with our own. People began to see the value in preserving natural habitats and understanding the creatures who lived in them. Storm's story had opened hearts and changed minds, and for that, Tom was grateful. But as much as they shared their message with the world, it was the quiet moments at home that Tom cherished the most. He watched as Storm grew older, his once vibrant energy giving way to a slower, more thoughtful pace. Storm still followed Tom around the cabin, still curled up beside him at night, but there was a quiet wisdom in the pup's eyes that reflected the many years they had spent together. Tom often found himself reflecting on their time together, on the way Storm had filled a hole in his heart that he hadn't even known was there. Storm had brought healing to Tom's life in ways that were hard to explain. He had been a constant companion during some of the darkest moments of Tom's grief, offering unconditional love when Tom had felt most alone. As the years went on, Tom understood that their bond wasn't just about saving a wild animal, it was about saving each other. Storm had reminded Tom that life, even in its hardest moments, still held room for connection, for love, and for new beginnings. As Storm grew older, Tom knew their time together was limited. It was a truth that weighed heavily on his heart, but it also made him appreciate every moment they spent together. He cherished the walks they took around the property, the quiet nights by the fire, and the way Storm would still curl up in his lap, purring softly. Those were the moments that meant the most to Tom, those simple, everyday moments that had made their bond so strong. When the time eventually came for Storm to pass away, it was peaceful. Tom sat by the fire, stroking Storm's fur, knowing that they had lived a full life together. Storm had left an indelible mark on Tom's heart, one that would never fade. As Tom buried Storm near the creek where they had first met, he smiled through his tears. The bond they shared had been special, rare, and profound. It was a bond that had transcended all boundaries, human and animal, wild and tame, and it had enriched both of their lives forever. The legacy of Tom and Storm's relationship lived on, not just in the lessons they had taught others about wildlife conservation, but in the quiet love they had shared. They had shown the world that the most powerful connections could come in the most unexpected ways, and that love, trust, and understanding were universal, no matter the species. And for Tom, that was a gift he would carry with him forever.